Well, Labor's seeking to characterise this as a capitulation. Now, as you mentioned, this relates to the $500,000 cap on non-concessional contributions to superannuation accounts over a lifetime. The government has since replaced this with a $100,000 annual limit, down from $180,000, which will come into force from July 1 of next year. Now, before the election, Labor was very critical of this, claiming that it was retrospective. But after the election, the coalition's backbench started to speak out against this cap. Now, namely Erica Betts, we had Chris Back as well, and George Christensen threatened to cross the floor. Now, the main problem they had with it was that it was peeling away the base. Conservatives didn't like it, they say. Now, before the election, the Prime Minister did say that the superannuation policy was ironclad, and during question time, the Shadow Treasurer, Chris Bowen, sought to seize on those comments.
Can the Prime Minister confirm that in June the Prime Minister was asked about superannuation? Can you foresee any circumstance in which the policy as detailed in the May 3 budget will change following the election? And the Prime Minister responded that it was absolutely ironclad. How can the Prime Minister claim to lead the country when even his absolutely ironclad promises can't survive the extreme elements of his own party?
Now, the Prime Minister responded to Chris Bowen's question by trying to characterise it as him listening to people who were complaining about the policy. Have a listen.
The opposition urged us to make some changes. Many other people did too. And when we listened to them and made some changes, well, the honourable member says, I listened to George. He may as well say, I listened to him. I may as well say, we listen to everybody because we consult. We listen, we consult, and then we make decisions based on the public interest.
Well, Australia actually has a long-standing agreement with New Zealand to resettle 150 refugees that were trying to come to Australia by boat. It was agreed to by the Gillard government, but it's never actually been taken up by Australia. Now, the Immigration Minister, Peter Dutton, did talk to Al Jazeera and did comment on whether New Zealand and Nauru could directly use a negotiation to resettle some of those refugees. Have a listen.
Nauru, as you say, is a sovereign country. If, as a sovereign country, it decided to accept New Zealand's offer of resettling some of the refugees in New Zealand, would you be happy with that?
Well, that's an issue between Nauru and New Zealand.
So you would have no objection if a deal were done between those two countries?
No, but let me make this very important qualification, because we have had people smugglers that have tried to send boats across the top of Australia to New Zealand before. Let me make this very important point. That people, if they've sought to come by boat, it doesn't matter where they're settled, in whatever third country, New Zealand or somewhere else, they will not be coming to Australia at any point.
Now, back in February, the Prime Minister John Key of New Zealand did stipulate two critical elements for him allowing refugees that were headed to Australia coming to New Zealand. One was the Australian government agreed, and secondly, that they were genuine refugees. Now, the New Zealand Immigration Minister, Michael Woodhouse, has in fact responded to Peter Dutton's interview, and they've said, our offer was made to Australia to take 150 offshore detainees who have been approved as convention refugees. We are not considering entering into a separate agreement directly with Nauru. Now, a separate agreement would be quite difficult. Of all the countries, New Zealand has been most critical of Nauru, and it isn't a strong relationship between the two countries. And also, Peter Dutton, as you heard in that interview, said that refugees that were trying to come to Australia by boat will never be able to come to Australia. But if they were given New Zealand citizenship, well, New Zealanders can automatically arrive in Australia without applying for a visa first and stay as long as they'd like, unless they have a criminal record. So Peter Dutton might be more open in those comments, but the practicalities of it may be more difficult.